kind of mangling his coordination just to save them. But my tactical senses are starting to tingle here. Maybe the knight can come out to e4. That knight can be pushed away with f5. What do you see here, Robert?
Well, knight e4 definitely is tempting, but the d6 pawn is under attack twice. So even there, you can take one of the rooks, play bishop takes d6. Maybe rook b1 is a move to consider because, well, I'm just going right after this b7 pawn. And as you're pointing out, there are some possibilities where you take right away, but I wouldn't want that knight hopping around, so I'm just going to take back on e1 with the queen.
Yeah, I was looking at knight takes e1, bishop takes b7, but no, the knight can simply evacuate where it came from, back to c2. Hans plays b5, bishop c6 looks very tempting, but none of these one-move tricks, one-move threats are doing anything. Hans, his pieces are all on the 8th rank except his king. It's the most active piece on the board, but look at how nicely they're protecting all of the critical squares. Hikaru's losing d6, and he doesn't have anything to show for it.
No, I was just looking, and there's just under 2 minutes left in the 5-minute plus 1 second increment time control. And rook e6, he's just gathered this pawn, and as you're showing, the knight can protect it for 1 turn, f5 kicks it back. So black is going to be up in material, and if we're just being frank here, it seems like Hans is outplaying Hikaru in these last 2 games.
The moment it becomes chaotic, the moment it gets to head-to-head combat, the center opens up, it feels like Hans, a previous game for sure, this game he's been tactically a little bit sharper, which does explain Hikaru's opening choice. How does Hikaru generate compensation? He's got like a move, maybe 2, to coordinate his pieces. Once d6 falls, you're also going to have to deal with a weakness on d3, and we called it, knight jumps to c5, maybe to b7 is where it wants to go, at least eliminating black's bishop pair.
That was very clever from Hikaru, just to see, oh, queen a5 is sick. I mean, you're pinning the rook, but he's okay, d3 not captured, and this is an example of Hans prioritizing his passed pawns over stealing more material, because when you take pawns, you open files. Queen takes d3, invites rook d1, that rook is going to try to get to d7, and the black king would be in the line of fire. So both sides just played those last few moves quite well. I would say that Hikaru has quite decent chances to survive, and he'll throw an h4 at the right moment, try to play h5, and he's going to try to weaken black's control the light squares, because only white has a light square bishop.
And that's the thing. I'm not sure who benefits in the event of a queen trade. Hans kind of wants a queen trade because the passed pawns are going to become more significant. You could argue if Hikaru can trade the queens and the rooks and blockade these pawns, which happens, maybe he earns drawing chances, but maybe Hikaru wants to keep the queens on the board because he feels that he can generate counterplay down the c-file using h4, h5, as you mentioned, carving out some light squares. This is a 3-result game, and if this gets down to a time scramble, black's king could start feeling really uncomfortable. h4, is it the order of the day, Robert?
Looks like a good move. This is officially the last game of the 5-minute plus 1 second increment time control. So for Hans, if he can get the win, he'll be only down 1 point heading into the shorter time control. So h5 played, stopping white's main idea, and queen b5. A queen trade is offered. So sometimes, even if you're down 2 to 3 pawns, you can make a draw with opposite colored bishops on the board, but Hikaru wants none of that. He wants to go for the black king, and I think it's the right idea. It looks losing to trade, especially when you have 30 seconds on your clock.
Look at the time situation. I was about to say Hans is down 2 minutes. No, he's up 2 minutes this time, so the shoe's on the other foot. You're supposed to go e4, turning the tables. You don't grab this juicy little morsel on d3 because it probably loses to rook d1. e4 is so... What do you even call that move? It's so...
Well, it's just such a ridiculous
Such a good move.
You're handing white a pawn in the center and opening the bishop, but here comes the rook. So that's why he wanted e4, because that way the white king would have been in danger. But Danya, rook c7, that threatens to win the game for white. So queen b4 offering the queen trade. Can you trade and play rook b1 here?
You absolutely can. That was sort of a desperate move by Hans, because rook c7, Ali Reza tweeted nui nui yesterday, knight knight. Rook c7 was knight knight to the black king. Now it's knight knight to one of these pawns, maybe both of them. No, just to one of them.
Well, bishop d5, you can just protect this rook, and then bishop d1 as well if rook a3 is played. So Hikaru doesn't really risk that much on the board, but his clock is doing him no favors. If there's tension that remains here, he could find himself in trouble. But Hikaru, he's a 4-time bullet chess champion for a reason.
Man, that would be such a big save for Hikaru. We said a win would propel him forward, but if you're losing, you save a game, you keep the lead, you like your chances. This is suddenly getting sharp again as the rook keeps harassing the black king, now gets behind the black pawn. Is Hans now going to play for Hikaru's clock? Can he take on d3 and try to get to d2?
Uh-oh, that's not going to be good for white. f2 falls, you're in big trouble here, but he allows it, so it's still equal apparently, but this is starting to look really bad for white.
He's going to lose f2, likely with check. Hans doesn't even rush to take it. The king has to hide on h3. Could get mated there with a bishop on g1. Bishop takes f2, hits the bishop on d5, and might be knight for white.
Wow, this is Hikaru Nakamura struggling under the duress of time trouble. Bishop g1, rook h2, checkmate.
What do you do?
Is the threat, and here it comes. Bishop g1. You have to play g4, I guess, just to survive.
HG and bishop h2 is mate.
He resigns. So Hikaru Nakamura resigns. Hans Niemann now has 4 points. So Hikaru still has the lead, but the last 2 games have gone Hans's way.
The queen sacrifice is what started it. It gave him the confidence to put pressure with the black pieces. Hikaru had an advantage in this last game. Then we thought he came back and was going to draw, overpressed, and Hans managing his time, using his confidence to squeeze this lead down to a single point. All things considered, not a bad first 90 minutes for Mr. Niemann.
What a difference a day makes and a different opponent might make. Hikaru Nakamura has the lead, so we shouldn't pretend otherwise. But Hans Niemann, right in the thick of this match, he is now down 5-4. He trailed by 3 points, but suddenly it's a 1-point match. And Hikaru Nakamura, you see him reacting there. He can't believe it. But Hans, he was sweating earlier, but now it is a close match. Just 1 point separates these two, and Hikaru Nakamura will have to find his form once more. It hasn't been crisp like it was at the start. He currently is leading by a point, Danya, but he needs to play better, unlike some of the games that we just saw in recent times.
It started really well for Hikaru. He was able to propel the game in a positional direction. He played that absolute positional masterclass, the c5 square, the a6 pawn. We remember that. But what I think is on top of most people's memory, other than the need for a coffee and bathroom break, is that queen f6 move, which capped off a beautiful attacking game by Hans Niemann. It was the first of 2 victories that allowed him to slice the lead down to 1. And it is the subject of our first game review. Hans had the white pieces. This is the penultimate game of the 5-minute segment, and it starts, like many others, with a Ruy Lopez. Hans deviating from the Italian, his trusty pet opening, and going for Hikaru's candidate prep. This bishop c5 cagey line that Hikaru has shown a great predilection for ever since his game against Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now, the game starts off in pretty standard fashion. Hikaru builds this inverted pawn triangle. We get a maneuvering phase of the game. c6, the center remains closed. Hans, h4, really signaling his intentions and threatening h5, kind of forcing Hikaru into a tailspin. We were expecting h6, but instead Hans activates his knight through the side of the board, and the critical moment came in this very chaotic, very tense position. We were fully expecting g6. Black is worse, but the situation is manageable. Instead, Hikaru full send, invites the bishop sacrifice on g5. Hans says, I am picking up the gauntlet, threatening several very nasty checks, but Hikaru, he gets his knight involved. And suddenly looks like black might mount a successful defense. But Hans, some very mature decision making. He takes on e5, he keeps the queens on the board, and now the fun part begins. Knight to e6 is a mistake from Hikaru. He should have preferred rook e8, fighting for control of the all-important e-file. We'll see just how important that file becomes momentarily. Rook takes e6 is the first brilliant move, but in this position, it looks like bishop takes g6 is automatic, and after king h8, white doesn't have all that much to show for the sacrificed rook. Instead, bishop f5 is the brilliant follow-up, first using the pin against the g-pawn to force the queen onto an awkward square. Now bishop takes g6, forces the king away, and the difference is that you can involve the knight with tempo. Knight f5 hits the queen. The queen has to maintain contact with the f6 square. The final piece joins the attack, and now the cherry on top. After knight e7, rook d6 was an impossible defensive chance for Hikaru. He misses it. And after knight takes d5, rook takes d5, the final brilliant move, a deflection sacrifice. Either you decline it and get mated with a pawn, or you accept it and get mated up a queen and a rook. Rook e8 is a beautiful back rank mate. Hans slices lead down to 2. He wins the final game. Down to 1 goes Hikaru's lead, but Hans still trails with 4 points to 5. What a first 90 minutes of the consolation match, Robert. This was awesome.
What a game that was. What a review that was by you, Danya. And it was so needed from Hans. So when you see that knockout there, then he follows up with a second consecutive win. Do you feel like Hans is really back in this and believes in himself?
He definitely believes in himself. He can be down 38 points and still believe in himself. But he feels pumped up. He feels like he can win several different ways. At the same time, Hikaru is a professional. He's got the most experience of anyone here. He's won the SEC, and he's done it many different ways. He's faced setbacks before. He still has an extra point. I think he feels pretty happy, all things considered, and he really needs this break. I think he's going to use it to press that reset button and reevaluate some opening decisions and come back fresh. We'll see what happens in this next big hour.
Well, Hikaru is wounded. He lost 2 games in a row at the end there, but he still leads by a score of 5-4. So he should be happy about that. We are heading to a break. The players, they get to rest for a little bit, but there's very little rest in a matchup this tense. When we return, we are back to Danny, Levy, and Canty in the arena.
Looking to deck out your closet this fall, or a gift for that person who loves chess? We've got you covered in our all-new merch store. Literally. Never forget that it's always chess o'clock somewhere, with clocks in a brand new colorway. And keep your mouse speed on point with a classic green or bubblegum pink mouse pad. Oh, Mittens wants to say something too. She says, check it all out at chess.com/shop. And yeah, you might want to do what Mittens says. You are...
Landias 100% ori yan i-Shopee mo.
21 years old, but you have all the experience. You're still number 2 in the world, and you've got the experience both online and offline. How does that play a role in your approach to the semifinals?
Yeah, you know, I think everywhere is a little bit different, but coming here to Paris, we already spoke about how I played the Grand Chess Tour, but actually the first major international competition I ever played was in France. It was in Cannes all the way back in 1997, before either Ali Reza or Hans were even born. So yeah, I'm reminded pretty much every day when I travel of sort of like these ancient, you know, bygone memories from a different time. I think certainly having the experience, having played in many events over the years, and certainly the Speed Chess Championship, that does play a role. I think the most important thing is to avoid tilt, and I've done that very well for the most part in the Speed Chess Championship. Certain other events, you know, it happens a little bit more, but the experience, it can't be underestimated. I think that's why I've always done so well in the Speed Chess Championship.
Let's talk about what everybody wants to talk about, which is Hans Niemann. You've had a long career. You've had rivals, but generally in chess, everything is relatively peaceful, and I wouldn't say anybody goes at one another like they do in any traditional, more combative sport, physically or otherwise. With Hans, it's not like that. He doesn't back down from saying whatever he wants about you, especially over the last year. Does that fuel you? Does that change the way you approach a match, a potential match, let's say, here in Paris or just in general? Do you like that, or do you prefer, you know, the other approach to having rivals?
Yeah, I mean, I think times change and people change. And I would say for myself, certainly when I was younger, I'd look at myself along the same vein of Hans, somebody who really used, like, sort of being disliked, being a bad boy of chess to my advantage as sort of the fuel in the fire to get better. But as I've gotten older, I've mellowed out a lot, and I look at life quite a bit differently. So I don't really look at it that way. I don't think that it's something that, like, I look at it as, like, it gives me motivation. It's more just I try to chill and, you know, go with the flow. I think when you make content creation, especially as opposed to being just solely a professional player, you learn to stop taking yourself so seriously. And I think for myself, now that I'm in that phase, you know, I listen to some of the things Hans says. I mean, I think they're somewhat misguided. But I also let it roll right off my back. I don't really think about him that much. I'm sure he thinks about me a lot more than I do. Yeah, it's, you know, it's a style he has. I think, though, that being said, you can only use sort of hatred or dislike or have, you know, the me against the world attitude. It will only take you so far. At some point, you have to be a little bit more practical. And again, I would even say for myself, I think I got to 2,700 pretty much with that attitude, but you have to make certain changes. And I think that, you know, sooner or later, I assume Hans will mellow out. He's had a you know, huge jump. He's quite high in the rankings now. But I will say, I think that attitude is only going to get you so far.
Halftime here, day 2 of the 2024 Speed Chess Championship from Paris. The beautiful Seine River and the Louvre right there. Walked across that bridge more than a few times. You've seen some of the Danny on the Street videos. A beautiful day we had, beautiful weather we continue to have here, and beautiful chess inside this arena here at the E Spot. Hans Niemann and Hikaru Nakamura are throwing down. We got to unpack this match and talk about where we're at. Hikaru Nakamura has a 5-4 lead, but Hans Niemann won the last 2 games before the break. Your thought about who has more momentum right now?
Well, it's definitely Hans who has more momentum. It was a really fascinating 5+1 segment. Hikaru got out to a 3-game lead. You kind of sat back in your chair and went, oh, this is going to go exactly how it went yesterday. Hikaru shows up really motivated, and Hans is simply not at that level yet. And Hans goes, bah, bah, and it's 5-4, and now you're like, oh, we have a match. This is amazing. I mean, the Smarter Chess predicted it by half a point different, but the bad news for Hans is if Hikaru has any form of a lead or if the match is tied going into Bullet, he's a huge underdog.
Well, speaking of Hikaru is right behind us throwing down with some Puzzle Rush right now.
Working.
I think that might be more than just wanting to keep his tactics spicy. Can we get some noise for Hikaru Nakamura, the Puzzle Rush solver right here? Let's go. What's funny is it might even be, I wonder, Kenny, if it's speed related, right?
Yeah.
Hikaru with the 5-minute segment behind him.
Yeah.
With the 5-minute segment behind him and the 3-minute ahead and then 1 minute, is Hikaru really working on the mouse skills more than anything?
Mouse skills, but definitely the puzzles. Of course, I miss some tactics. Of course, that's work. I miss some puzzles. What do I have to do? I have to now sit down and get some work in. Also, put it behind me. Of course, the 3-1 is coming up, right? With that being said, I'm up 1 game. I got to forget about what happened. I'm still up. It's a new match.
Yeah. Okay, well, despite the momentum you're saying that Hans has, and by the way, that was incredible, the jab there. You've been working out,
nice.
you've been doing the boxing, so very nice showing off. But despite that, if you had to script this as a Hikaru Nakamura fan and thinking about he has started slowly in every 5-1 portion, in every match to date. He didn't start slowly here. Regardless of the momentum, Hikaru has a 5-4 lead, and he's a guy who typically gets better as the time controls get faster. Right. You got to be thinking that's good for Hikaru, right?
Yeah, overall it's good. Of course, you never want to go from... Yesterday was 7-2. Today it's 5-4, so that's those 2 games. Right. Theoretically, it could have been 7-2, but it's 5-4. It is what it is. And Hikaru himself has always stated, he's going to bet on himself if going into the later segments of the match, and as it gets faster, he's got the lead. So what can you do?
Okay, so you're thinking it's mostly about the puzzles, not Hikaru trying to warm up the mouse before the time controls get faster.
Yeah, of course, definitely.
He's half-man everything, half-man else.
In the other half, we don't actually know yet, right? But of course, you do need to understand, hey, I'm up. Try to get these puzzles back, try to play my best chess as much as I can right now, especially going into the 3-1. As time gets faster, right? Sometimes Hikaru gets a little bit better, but Hans is coming in hot, so it's going to be in for a great match, of course.
Hans is coming in hot. Hans is taking his seat right behind us. He's also getting dialed in and ready. We're going to be moving into the 3-1 portion. Both players apparently are more than ready to do this. They are getting buckled up and ready to rock. So, all right, one of the things we talked about upstairs when I was in the booth with Robert yesterday at the halftime between Magnus and Hans was whether we would see a changing of the guard in terms of the X's and O's on the board, opening changes, something not going well for the players. Your thoughts on anything you saw there? Hans changing an approach or ride that momentum because he just got the 2 victories, or Hikaru changing anything as far as the opening goes?
I don't know. I mean, you start with the white pieces, right? So we're about to find out. Hikaru likes the ready systems with 1 fianchetto, 2 fianchettos, and Hans has been going back to the true and tried Italian. So we might be seeing more of the same. I think the Bullet is where we're going to see some opening changes, but the good news is they're about to play some chess, and we're going to find out.
That's right.
Well, will we see opening changes? We don't know, and I don't even know where to look right now because it's live television. We're having a blast, and again, whatever we're going to see in regards to changes on the board or not, I'm gonna throw a change up right here because actually we want to make sure we throw this segment a shout out to our sponsor, Display. Go to chess.com, not chess.com/display. Go to display.com/chess. By the way, feel that, Levy.
Ooh, that's nice.
It is nice,
but this
right?
one's
It's legitimately nice.
This one's nicer, right here. This one's nicer.
I think we're gonna go with mine. Leave my. What your? No.
No. This is.
Do mine.
Shout out to Display, man. This is we got this one right here. We got so many cameras. Nobody tells me. I'm showing it to this one. It's not even up yet.
That's awesome.
They're trying to cut to this one. Look at that. I mean, that is.
Do you have 7 of those on your wall?
No, yes, I do. I have many, and I purchased all of them at display.com/chess. That's what I did, and that's what you should do.
And if you use the command display, you get 32%. Get a link to get up to 32% off this weekend, and this weekend only. It actually is a big deal, by the way, to use display.com/chess. It helps us, helps that we get all the tracked credit that we need. Get the rook out of the way here. I'm going to hang it up so Levy doesn't do it anymore. We're going to put it. No, I'm kidding. One more time. It is actually pretty easy. We have a bunch of them. My teenage boys have them. They love them. They don't have a rook, though. Maybe I should get them the rook.
Definitely got to
Take them off the wall so the landlord can't take away your security deposit like he did mine. So,
All right. Well, seriously, go to display.com/chess. If you're thinking about buying one, the rook one is pretty sexy. There's some pretty awesome ones as well. We've already shown the Je suis le pion. We did that earlier.
We did that one, yeah. We did that one.
Please go to display.com/chess. Do it this weekend. Get your discount. Right now, we're going to please send it out of here. The players are like, please get out of our way. Let us do our thing.
I can't believe they have to listen to this.
So we are going to do that and throw it upstairs to the booth. Danya and Robert, Naroditsky and Hess. I don't think I've ever said your names in that order. First time for everything here in Paris. Guys, are you ready?
Definitely ready, Danny. How about you, Danya?
I'm pretty ready. I wasn't really ready to commentate with you. It's the first time, but I think it's been pretty good so far. It's been such a great match. Made an appearance. And Robert, really the chess has, let me think of a synonym, it has talked for itself.
It certainly has. The chess is speaking, and the players, they're in the playing hall. They are getting set. The next games are about to get underway, and we are going to a shorter time control. 3 minutes plus 1 second increment. It's the Title Tuesday time control. And Hans Niemann, he should be feeling some new life in his chances. He won 2 games in a row. Hikaru Nakamura still leads 5-4, but he's probably not so thrilled about what's transpired recently.
He's definitely disappointed in those last 2 games. He was up by 3. He's only up by 1. But that's balanced by the fact that Hikaru, he said many times through the years, 3+1 is his strongest time control. That may or may not be borne out by the statistics, but I think he feels really comfortable. He feels that it's a good cross between, being able to stop at a critical moment, but being fast enough where he's able to harness his incredible skill in time scrambles that has been on display, but maybe hasn't been as consistent as we've been used to. Folks, an hour of 3+1 awaits us in just players are locked in. We're underway. Seatbelts fastened or not because we have a Berlin.
Well, I also just noticed that Hans is higher rated than Hikaru. So those last couple games have actually flipped the higher rated player in this match. So Hans, he's getting ready. He's got the white pieces in this game. And we see these familiar pawn structures time after time, Danya. So I'm wondering when Hans will go to c4 like he did yesterday in a couple games against Magnus, or if he's just going to play best by test e4 every single game.
Yeah, of course, Hans is an e4 player by nature, but sometimes things aren't working out for you, and you need to start with a clean slate. Hans, of course, likes the Berlin with black as well. Both players are really experienced in these structures, so I don't think the game is going to be decided by the opening phase as long as they keep repeating, these Ruy Lopez structures. Hikaru is a little bit passive, though. Hans, he went d3, now he's played d4, and I think he's actually acquitted himself really well on the white side of whichever Ruy Lopez Hikaru has thrown at him.
You say exactly what I played, when I was competitive. I always played these sort of wily positions where it looks like black is cramped, not doing much of anything. But that knight, as you're pointing out, can come to g5, and the d4 square is already under attack. And if white plays pawn to d5, you're shutting down the center, you're releasing the tension. I'll move my knight out the way, and then later I'll try to open things up.
I'm glad you mentioned that you played this because I was going to accuse you of being a hypocrite. Maybe like 1% of the people will get this reference, but that's the 1% I care about. No, just kidding. I care about everyone equally. We have some trades in the center. Hikaru likes recapturing on e5 with the knight, and then with the bishop, he likes maintaining sort of the instability of the pawn structure. And we saw that game earlier, and of course, he sabotages everything I just had to say as he takes back with the pawn. Here, I actually like bishop d7 and knight c4, and the fact that this knight is just camping on it out on h7, that might become significant. I feel like white's slightly better. I mean, queen to d5 here, Robert. The pawn on e5 would become really weak in the event of a queen trade. Great positional chess by Hans.
Yeah, you and Hans speaking the same language right here. And look at Hans's face. I mean, I feel like he really has rebounded nicely, not just on the scoreboard, but just his demeanor. I think he is much more confident than he was when he trailed by 3 points. So queen d5 played. The change in pawn structure would help white. The e5 pawn would be a target. And knight f8 played, giving up b7 or not, because the knight c4 is loose.
Yeah, but that pawn is hanging. Rook a to d1 is essentially begging to be played, and black's pieces are sort of tripping up over each other, which happens sometimes when you've got a space at a disadvantage. Can black get away with rook a to d8, or are you going to end up losing the pawn on e5 at the end of the line? He goes rook a to c8, Robert. It's a slightly weird move. Almost looks like a mouse slip, but Hikaru doesn't ever mouse slip. Just like once per century. Is that the 1 per century mouse slip? I don't think so.
Feels like a Hikaru specialty. These sort of passive-looking moves that are perfect. Look at that. Rook c8, rook b8. I never would have thought just to shuffle my rooks like this without seemingly doing anything. But he's defended his b7 pawn. Knight takes b7. The queens are traded. You drop that knight there. So, Donnie, I would say this is actually pretty amazing defense. It seems like nothing has happened. But now Hikaru's up, 15, maybe about to be 20 seconds on the clock, and he's protecting all of his weaknesses.
My coach, he liked to call this bunker chess, right? You just kind of clump together. You're not playing for the space advantage. Everything's back on the 8th rank, but it gets increasingly frustrating, increasingly more tilting for the opponent. Now E5 is defended, and it almost feels like a victory when you have equalized. It's like the Scottish GM, Jonathan Rosen, he calls it the goalkeeper's glory, right? How does the goalkeeper keep himself motivated? Is he like, maybe will score 1 goal for his entire career? Well, it's just constantly deflecting your opposing side's goals that keep you in the game. When you're on the defensive, that's how you're motivating yourself to keep defending. Hikaru's also up 30 seconds on the clock somehow. Kicks the knight away from c4. Black is close to equalizing, but hats off to Hans. He's kept his pieces on really active squares, and he still has that nice little grip down the d file.
And White's position is better, but the reason it's harder to play is because you know you have that slight advantage and you want to prove it. So the knight on e3, will the rook move back so the knight can land on d5? That looks tempting. Knight g4 is an idea in many of these positions. An h5 play to stop the knight from getting there. And then f3, so White's pawn structure is very healthy. The rook on c6 for Black is kind of awkward. It pushed the knight back from c4, but it has nowhere to go from there.
One of the biggest differences between human play and engine play is humans use the idea that it's hard to make a move, right? Hans is improving slowly, but it's very hard for Hikaru to find a move that doesn't harm his position, that doesn't blunder a pawn, that doesn't leave a square exposed, a fork, knight to e7 later down the line. He gets his knight into f4, though, encouraging this rook to drop into d7. Now the h4 pawn is actually hanging. Will we see Hans take it, or will this knight seek even a bigger role on d5? Bishop h4 is a move.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand this because bishop takes h4 is viable, as you mentioned. Knight takes h4. What is Black's idea? Because you have just stolen the pawn, and now that the knight retreated to e6 for Black, h4 is a permanent weakness. And now e5 is directly targeted. So I do feel like Hikaru, he's doing well on the clock, but the position is improving for Hans.
This has been a really exciting game. I mean, it was an anti-Berlin. It looks like nothing has happened, and yet so much has remained behind the scenes, and the tension, right? Every move carries a threat. But now Hans's clock is dwindling. Is he running out of threats to create? He gives Hikaru a tempo. f5 is not out of the question as Hikaru gets some space on the queen side, but he gives up this c5 square, and can he afford that with his position already this fragile?
Bishop c5 played. Bishop takes f8, rook d7 coming soon, and after c6, the d6 square is White's for the taking. But Hikaru continues, as you said, to bunker up. He's just trying to keep everything defended. Bishop e7, another good move.
Look at this. Look at his pieces.
It looks
what shape is that? Is that a trapezoidal rhombus, a rhombozoidal trapezoid?
It looks so terrible for Black, and yet Hikaru is hanging right in there. He dropped a6 pawn. What does he want after rook takes a6?
And he had to play that. I think the other rook coming to d8 is what scared him, because rook g8, there was a mate threat. So at least he wards off the rook. Finally plays f5 a little bit later than I thought he would. And the position is heating up just as Hans's clock is dwindling down. Black's knight could also try to access those juicy dark squares on the king side. This ain't over.
No, it's not a king h6.
Oh, knight g3.
Yeah, this king can go up the board for Black as well. He's pinning the...
Oh, knight f2, f4 mate.
Oh, that is crazy. Look at Hans's time. He's got no time. Rook d7's coming.
And then f4 check is actually going to win the knight. What does Hans do? He's down to 1 second. He's going to lose this game. He drops the e4 pawn.
Okay, will Hikaru take it is the big question. He goes to just double his rooks first, but no, he grabs that pawn, knight back, and now the e-pawn is dangerous.
And Hikaru playing really fast. He feels confident that he can win this game on the board and on the clock. He's got 2 enemies, Hans, that he's fighting as the knight drops back to f5, clearing the red carpet for the e-pawn. Suddenly looks like that pawn, I mean, these obstacles are just going to be blown off the board, and Hans loses on top. Around.
I mean, look at what Hikaru just did. At first, it looked like Hans was pressing, and then it turned into a demolition from Hikaru. He used the clock as a weapon, and he just, honestly, just brute forced his way through.
And that bunker chess, it beautifully turned into aggressive chess. He played f5 at the right moment. He gave up the a6 pawn. So many decisions that are easy to skip over when you try to break down the mastery that Hikaru shows time and time again in worse positions. That was awesome. That was a textbook display, and he pushes this lead up back to 2. He goes back to his weird double fianchetto, nondescript opening.
And I wonder what Hikaru's listening to. Is this some lo-fi girl? He's bopping to the music right now. And he typically does that when he just scored a nice victory. And it was a turnaround, but still, he's just going to remember that positive feeling at the end of the game where his Epon was unstoppable.
Yeah, you can tell just looking at the two cameras there exactly who won that game and who lost it.
Yeah, Hans grimacing a little bit, and Hikaru is not stopping. He continues to dance. And look at this position, though. It's very close, but that move, knight takes e5, is available. The bishop on b7 is undefended, and this could be a potential tilt from Hans.
And that's a little dance macabre there by the bishops. Knight takes e5 is such a nice tactic. I will wait for this move to be played. Hikaru was doing some puzzle rush there, wasting not a single second. He looks off to the side. As Danny would say, that's Hikaru expression number 23. And that knight's about to be dancing the Macarena after knight takes e5, and maybe so will Hikaru.
Yes, this wins a pawn. You see this? The knight takes the knight on d7 instead of the bishop on g2. If black takes the knight, the bishop is lost. He brings the bishop back, the knights are traded, and white is simply up a pawn. But is it so simple, Danya? You see the light squares are weak for white on the king side. You're pointing to e4. That really clogs the lane, and that makes Hans feel like he has absolutely no compensation.
I think it is that simple, and normally it wouldn't be, because you would have these really nice light squares. Sometimes you actually sack a pawn to get that uncontested bishop, but it's the presence of this move e4. And Hikaru isn't even rushing it because queen f3, obviously not a thing. You could just trade bishops, and now I would play e4. I wouldn't hold out forever. First, he stops the move d5. Honestly, the patience exhibited by Hikaru has been impressive. Make sure to defend this knight. Maybe Hans will stick a bishop on f3, though. Has he waited too long to play e4?
Queen b2, look at this. The queen can't leave. You'd like to play queen f5 to h3 and deliver, what is that called, lobster pincer or whatever? But that's not happening. He first plays rook e5, but now e4, it makes perfect sense. Rook e3 for white, just to challenge that bishop. Knight to d5 is coming, and it seems like Hans is down a pawn, but also his king is going to be in danger.
And the most tilting thing is Hikaru also has knight to a4. If the rook leaves e5, a queen trade will immediately extinguish any attacking possibilities that black has. There's too many threats. Rook e3 is coming, as you said. If you don't move this rook, then knight d5. If you do knight a4, Hikaru, another masterclass, and likely a 3-point lead is in the cards.
I don't even see a move for Hans. You know, you like play h5, h4, rook h8, and go for some phantom attack that won't even get off the ground. But for Hikaru, he saw the moment, knight takes e5. It was kind of a one-move blunder from Hans, and I wonder if that's just purely because of the previous game where he had a nice position, he lost it, and he remained frustrated. You can't take past games with you into the next one.
And who knew that Magnus has some insights to offer? In the interview, he pointed to Hans's occasionally sloppy play, especially when he doesn't have the momentum on his side. And this could be the deciding factor here. Hikaru, I think, just one or two moves away from winning more material. Rook e3, queen g4, h3. You got to be careful because black could sack the bishop and get the rook to h5. Mr. Nakamura.
Knight d1 to d2.
Oh.
It doesn't have to be the best move according to the engine, but this move does exactly what Hikaru wants. There's not going to be a checkmating attack. He's going to kick that bishop, and if that bishop moves, f2 to f4 is about to make use of the pin and a little fork as well.
You're exactly right, but maybe f7 to f5. I think what Hans needs is to find a way to involve this other rook. f5, knight d2, you could play f takes e4, temporarily defending the bishop, and then get the rook mobilized on f8. So Hans, as his clock dwindles, his chances look equally grim. He has to find some way to avoid having to move this bishop from f3. It ain't looking good. The queen goes back to f6. You could get your knight back to c3, but no. Hikaru completes the maneuver, and he might even choose just to play f4, trade the queens. He's going to win this endgame.
And even if this weren't fully objectively winning, knight b1 is a beautiful retreat to get the knight to a better square. I think with Hans having 20 seconds left, there's no chance. Practically speaking, black does not have an opportunity to survive.
And Hikaru doesn't want to give him a single victory, even the smallest one in this game. He stops b5. He could actually still prepare b4, and if Hans plays a5, then you can bid goodbye to any breakthrough ever in your life in this game, maybe other than f5. Maybe that's what Hans needs to do. No, knight d5. And knight c7, ooh.
Oh, he missed knight d5, which also picked up the b6 pawn at a minimum. And now he's just playing this slowly because knights are better in closed positions. Even if the pawns were equal, white would probably still be better. Oh, that's nice. Just try and trap the bishop. But the bishop has no active diagonal to work with.
Every time the bishop is passive, we say it's passive. Every time it tries to get active, it gets trapped. What do we want from this thing? And Hikaru can win many different ways. He can go rook d1 and d4. He can go e5. I wouldn't play e5. He can enjoy his position for another hour and then play d4.
And it seems like Hans, he's playing really on the increment at this stage. He's down to under 5 seconds. He's got to make a move. He gets F5 in. So at long last, it does feel like his bishop will get to a more promising diagonal. But look how many weaknesses there are down at B6 thing. But the E4 pawn and the square is also vulnerable.
But if he had taken B6, you would have allowed Rook B8. Hikaru allows the trade, but it doesn't change the character of the position because E5 is coming. Maybe even he takes F5 force, because you will have G4 at the end of the line. Kind of a little sloppy there by Hikaru, and he keeps missing the forced wins. Hans sacks another pawn to get the E5 square and make it difficult for Hikaru to win via a breakthrough. And Hikaru slows down.
I think Hikaru wins by a tempo here, and that's why he has slowed down. Because F5 looks bad strategically. King F6, King E5, and you're like, wait a second, did I just ruin everything? And he took, and he still is going for the H file, but I thought F5 made perfect sense. But here, the rook can also land on F5, King F4, Pawn E5, things of that nature.
Well, it's a matter of time until the time decides the game. So Hikaru, he hasn't done anything totally wrong. He hasn't blundered. Maybe he missed some forced wins, but it's just two winning. E5 is coming. Hans is going to lose a bunch of pawns. You could take on D6 and Rook F1. Rook F3 is winning. You could play E6. It's a menu of options for Hikaru. And he's up 2 pawns. He's up a minute. Hans is still fighting. Kudos to him. He has put on a great defensive display, but he is just getting pummeled here.
Oh.
Or is he?
Because Rook F5 drops D6. Rook F6 drops D5. And this actually isn't that easy. If Black is able to scoop up the D pawn, one of them, it seems like the chances to hold are much greater.
Every time we think this game is 2-3 moves away from being over, it might be 2 or 3 moves away from being over. Hans involves his other rook. Suddenly White's king not feeling as comfortable, but it can hide away on H4. Remember that rook endgame that Hikaru saved against Fallujah? Hans is still in the game.
Yeah, it's amazing the way he's able to fight on here. But now for this rook trade, this seems easy at this stage. There are 2 separate pass pawns. The white king is active. You could take B3, but that's not going to stop the D pawn. And Hikaru Nakamura wins. We have a 3-point lead once more. The 3-minute plus 1 second increment. Danya, you said that Hikaru claimed that's his best time control. He's proven it right now.
He is, and he might not be in perfect form. He might have converted that, a little bit faster 5 years ago, but it doesn't matter. He's doing enough things right to put the kind of pressure that he needs on Hans's position and Hans's clock, and this lead back to its largest of the match. This is a pivotal game for Hans, who switches up his opening and pushes the queen's pawn instead. Maybe a little Beth Harmon is what he needs.
Well, we do have not a queen's gambit accepted, but a queen's gambit declined, and we have a solid pawn structure for black. You look on the queen side, it's a pawn chain. A pawn's best friend is another pawn, but white is going right after the b7 pawn. Danya, these types of moves, rook a7, they're ugly, I think, especially for players who aren't so experienced. Like, what in the world is that? But it's solid. It's hard to actually break through here for white.
I'm going to rewind for just a second and show an important line, because the position, pretty solid. Not much is going to happen in the next couple moves. But after rook a7, what this hinges on, as we bring up an analysis board here, is that after the bishop trade on d6, white tries queen b6, hitting the rook. Looks like black is losing the pawn, but there's a beautiful retreating move, knight to c8, forcing this queen back. Just look at this arrangement of pieces. This is the tactical justification. Let's run through the current moves really quickly. Black completing the development. Hans playing the typical move b4 and a4, preparing b5, and he's just carrying out the textbook plan. Hikaru, what's he doing?
Well, maybe he wants b5, knight d6, knight c4 type of ideas, but is he in time? That's always an essential question, because if white takes on b5, you're first to the a file. That looks very pleasant, but that might be the way to go, because otherwise white simply pushes the b pawn, and we see it here. It's a pawn minority attack. It's a Carlsbad structure. But Donna, a5 played by Hikaru, so he's keeping more pawns on the queen side, and that queen on b2, not the best placed piece. And after knight takes g6, white can get access to the b1 square, which is really important.
But I'm surprised that Hans didn't play this, the straightforward way. B takes c6, get a long-term weakness on c6, and that knight on h4, it just exchanged itself for the bishop. Very tempting, but it also could have involved itself in the direct attack on the c6 pawn. Feels like Hans might have missed a moment to make the most of his advantage, but it still seems like he's in the driver's seat. Hikaru recaptures with the rook, going for piece activity over the health of his pawn structure. Feels like he needs to change the course of this game, and that's what he might be doing. Is he going to jump to c4?
That's the move I would.
Rook c8, knight a7 is a fork to watch.
Knight e4, there's rook f6 ideas, queen f5 as well. The f2 pawn could be tender in some positions, and well, now he's fighting for the c file, rook c8 next. So I feel like Hikaru's doing everything he needs to do to stay in this game. He is worse on the queen side despite being a pawn ahead there, right? The b7 pawn is extra, but it's also backwards. And on the other hand, white where are you going to push forward from? That's not an easy question to answer.
I wouldn't rule out G5 and Rook H6, taking a page of Ali Reza's book. We saw him doing that with the white pieces yesterday, but Hikaru's definitely looking at the king side. I'm not saying G5 leads to checkmate, but Hans should not ignore the fact that there are no pieces surrounding his king, and he doesn't, right? He wants to make sure there are no pieces surrounding anything, and that there are no pieces at all.
Look at that juicy outpost on b4. That's a dark square. White has a light square bishop. So if the knights get traded, right, the white knight is gone and a knight lands on b4, done. You cannot kick it out of that square.
Yeah, Hans needs to do something before that happens. Maybe he needs to take on e4 before the knight gets to b4, and then play the move rook to c1. Who benefits if the rooks get traded? That's a hard strategic question as the time situation equalizes. And I think Hikaru, he's just done an excellent job of pounding White's initiative, getting his pieces active. I guess we'll get an answer to that question pretty momentarily.
This exact sequence has happened, and White has the best pawn on the board, right? The d4 pawn is a protected pass pawn, but it can't move forward. The knight on b4 is really powerful there. And then I may land on d3. So White does need to be careful that king can get in some danger. It may seem safe. There's only one black queen in the mix. But for example, if that knight could go to f6 and then g4, the queen can infiltrate on the h file or on the first rank. So Hans does need to be careful right now.
He can take on a5, but there's an important perpetual that you should keep track of here. Queen d1 and called it. Looks insignificant with no rooks on the board, but the queen and the knight are a fearsome attacking tandem, and sometimes all you need is a queen to force the draw. Now b6 might run into queen to c2.
I'm thinking queen d7 here, Don. Yeah, he gives up.
So is Hikaru.
What do you make of this? And I think Hans answered the question that he didn't want to have a pawn race where he's got central pawns for outside pawns. But Danya, that's, I think, a clear little win for Hikaru because Hans just went back and forth.
And now, again, with that 3-point lead, Hikaru is back to playing kind of manager risk chess. And Hans is the one who has to refrain from repeating, which is pretty risky. He is up 30 seconds on the clock as he gets his queen to a nice multi-purpose square. It guards d1. It controls the c-file. What's on the c-file? Nothing. We might see a kind of Soviet schoolboy move from Hikaru. The queen's kind of jockeying for position here. It's the calm before the storm, or at least it feels that way.
The a4 pawn, though, you need to look out for that. Knight b6 at some moment could be annoying with queen c6 to follow. These kind of ideas where if you can keep attacking the a4 pawn, you're protecting the there it is. You could take on e4, but you drop a4, and that looks scary for White because the a5 pawn, that could be a huge asset.
So maybe queen c3 is what's required. Trade the a pawn for the a pawn, but then black gets a pass b pawn. That knight can jump to b2 and back around at an outpost that you mentioned. And so nice that black's king has this lovely, very safe, protected square on h7, waiting for it in the event of a back rank check.
And Hans has been up on time, but suddenly we're getting closer to clock equality, although now Hikaru's in for a big think, and he trades the queen. So, Don, in end games, we typically like outermost pawns, but as you're pointing out, the knight coming to d6, the black knight can come to c3, but a5 will drop if that's the case.
That's exactly right. Maybe Hikaru, it's a very audacious move. He might want to sack the e-pawn at the right moment, break through with b5, and run his a-pawn down the board. That's a lot of pawns to give up, and even if White gives up the knight for black's a-pawn, that pawn avalanche as a result might be overwhelming.
Wow.
f5 by Hikaru. He wants knight c3 next.
And the knight can't get back around to protect the a4 pawn. So they don't know the evaluation. You all do, and so do we. But look at this. It's equal, but it's actually not that clear. The black king is sprinting to the center. Does White push the d pawn? No, it keeps it in place, and suddenly White's winning.
His White's pawns are going to mobilize. King to d5. White's going to go f3 and e4, and it's black's pawns that are further advanced. But look at this knight paralyzing them. You can't go b5. Here come White's pawns pushing the king around like a plaything. And a g4 by Hans. Very patient. He's going to go e5 or d5 very shortly, right now.
But he might need to pick correctly because sometimes you play e5 and the black king gets right back into the d5 square. But he can't play d5, but then the black knight gets back to c5.
So he plays neither.
Yeah, he brings his king back around. The knight is trapped. So Hikaru gives up a5, and he's hoping that he can just go after the white pawns. But I think with those double G pawns for both sides, I mean, that's one of the ugliest pawn structures you can see.
Oh my gosh.
In complete control here.
And finally, Hikaru gets one of his pawns moving. That knight is just jumping around. And it has had way too much coffee. And is it finally time to push d5? No.
He goes back because, king d3. So you're giving up the g3 pawn, but the knight's trapped there. King e3 to f3.
Oh my gosh. And Hikaru might have to give up his second pawn to extricate that poor knight.
It's not getting out.
It's still not going to get out. Knight f1, king e2, knight h2. I think he should try b3. But you can just, oh my gosh.
He wants to trade off all the pawns.
Great try. I've drawn so many of these positions. You don't know which pawn to stop with which piece, and you end up losing your only pawn.
I'm looking at Hans here.
Oh, my lands.
Oh, here's the G pawn.
And this is typical Hikaru. He's going to go G3. White's pieces are going to be tied down to stopping these passers. B3.
Oh, my
Max
goodness.
King sliding in. It's a draw.
It's like a split in bowling, right? You just can't get them all. The knight goes to G3, the king goes back to D5, and
He blundered. Oh, no. Is it a win?
Oh, look
How
at
do
it.
you win?
Look at his face. He's really upset.
Oh, G1 queen.
G1 equals queen.
Oh, my gosh.
Hans blunders it right back, and he slaps his forehead. That game is a draw. Hikaru, he is fortunate. The crowd is going wild. But, Danya, that was a win for Hans Niemann. He should have taken that game.
I'm trying to figure out how he could have won that. It was knight to G1 in the end instead of king D2. But he had 3 seconds to find it.
But look at them, Danya. I mean, you see Hikaru. He's dancing once again. And it looks like Hans, he is just beside himself.
It was a tale of one night, but it's a tale of two expressions. Hikaru, he did that against Ali Reza. We got a little taste of that. Hans just got a big taste of that right here, and that was a game he needed to capitalize on.
And this could be one of those match-changing games. Hikaru was already in the lead. He was the heavy favorite. But if you look at Hans's face, he is furious at himself to let that game slip. But it's really a testament to the strength of Hikaru Nakamura. He has won the Speed Chess Championship 5 times for a reason. He's a 4-time Bullet Chess champion. He's won the U.S. Championship in Classical Chess 5 times. A Fisher Random World Championship to boot. You can't say enough about his accolades. And it's because he can defend positions just like that, where most of us, I would have resigned. What, knight F5 check? Are you kidding me? That kept him in the game.
No, that move, I mean, you could have given me an hour, and to preemptively give up, and you're like, here, you have it, and then to draw that position, I'm shocked that they're still using the mice that we started with, because that's why they didn't invite me to the SEC. That mouse would have been across the border in, like, I don't know, some other European country. But Hans needs to keep his composure. He can't let this lead balloon to 5, because we know that that is a path of no return against Hikaru. D3. Speaking of a pass deep on, Hans loading it up here.
Yeah, that's actually really annoying because you can't play Rook D1 as the bishop on H5 covers that square. So Queen D2, getting out of that tempo, gaining move with D3. But then at some point, F4, pointed out F4 and G4, knight to F5. This is the type of position that Hikaru's long loved, and D3 was a natural move.
Bad. Takes an F4.
As you said, take an F4, and where is that knight going? Is it really going back to G6? That looks ugly. Your bishop on H5 is trapped, so you can't do that. And if you go back to D7, you just drop the D3 pawn.
And the problem is black has what's called pseudo-activity. It looks like your pieces are good, but they're just getting pushed away. They're getting swatted like flies. Queen D4 check, no problem. King's going to move, and the knight's going to jump to F5, pushing the queen away. Hans is, I wouldn't say this was a tilt game. I think he overestimated his activity. Knight G6, you could play knight takes G6, and black will have to recapture with the bishop, and there will be no bishop after F5.
Yeah, there's not much to say in that variation. And the players, you could see Hikaru, he is really happy right now because that match could have changed. We saw when Hans won the penultimate game of the longest time control, he then won the final one. And then in that position, Hans had an objectively won game, and he probably thought it was so simple. And yet Hikaru continues to bring the tricks. There are no tricks here. White is just playing F4. If the knight retreats to D7, you drop D3. As you mentioned, if you drop G6, you lose a piece. So this just looks really bad for black, and easy plus for Hikaru right now.
It almost looks losing, and bishop B2 there was a way to give up the 2 pieces for a rook. Hans, I think, probably makes the right decision, all things considered. That's a depressing move to have to make. And the worst thing is you still have these problems with your bishop. They can be solved with F6. That opens a whole new can of worms, that white knight. It's just waiting to jump into F5.
Knight F5, knight D6 ideas are in the air. You could even play G4. I know it exposes your king a little bit, but you want to get a rook to D1 at some point. So this is something to consider as, you know, avalanche of pawns. But maybe there is just rook E1 and pawn to E5, things like that.
Rook E5, F takes E5, F5. Hikaru might be feeling it here. He is feeling it, but he jumps to F5. Rook to D1 contesting the D file. I mean, he's got a whole menu of options here. Trade and Queen F2 hitting the knight.
Okay, there is some G5 stuff that you have to look out for. I know it looks very risky, but you might need to try it if you feel like Queen.
Well, of course. I mean, obviously, we didn't need the blue air. We knew that. Who does it think we are? I mean, amateurs.
The queen going to the other side of the board, not expected. The rook comes to D2, so Hans is actually giving himself chances, and E5 is played. G5, it's a move that we talked about, right? It's something that you can consider if you're Hans. But as you look at the current position, that white knight wants to go into d6. The f file is now open, but that rook on d2 for black is really active, and that's causing Hikaru to pause a little bit.
And g5 there, if you could put a knight on f4, it would justify it, but the knight from f5 could have dropped into h6 with a fork. Hans, again, he's shown a lot of resilience, a lot of skill defending what seem like hopeless positions, but it's taking him a lot of time to find these good moves. And at some point, it doesn't matter how well you've defended or how long you've defended. What does Hikaru do? Does he drop into d6? Does he move his king out of the pin?
Just plays h5, but he gives black that g5 square for the pony. So in some positions, you're happy to establish that knight there. And Hikaru has said that the best move played slowly is often worse than a good move played quickly, right? Like, you just got to move sometimes. And right now, Hans, he's moving, but he's down a full minute. He's also down a pawn, and he has activity. He's got some pins going along, but Danya, there's a protected passed pawn on e6.
There is indeed, and wow, he's down a pawn, but he might not be down a Hans.
Wait, what was that? He just gave up his pawn.
A protected passed pawn on e6? What you were talking about? Donuts?
It was quite
pawn.
That was really surprising, and now if you are Hikaru, you have to be really careful, because there is a knight on a dark square. You can't compete for the dark squares. a2 is loose. Danya, Hans can turn this one around.
That was f6 was crazy, because not only did he hang upon on e6, Hans could have even taken on f6 and played king e7. I mean, Hikaru is the master of sitting on his advantage. This is a huge chance for Hans. I mean, a2 is hanging. Rook f2 is a scary move to play when he plays it. But Black's got the edge here because the h-pawn has advanced very far. Black's king is more active. We know how jumpy these knights can be.
And bishop e8, so he's trying to force those black pawns forward, but the black pawns and dark squares can't be targeted. I guess that you can keep this king on e3. You're feeling happy about your position. You keep the opposition, but this looks really risky. Danya, if the clocks were reversed, I would say Hans was definitely winning this game. I still feel like Hans should win this just based on the knight hopping all over the board.
You're exactly right. It's probably a draw, but Hans can play this forever. He can jump to any part of the board, creating threats, and eventually Hikaru is going to let the knight access a square that he wasn't supposed to let it access. Apparently there's a win here, and apparently Hans is about to find it. Bishop g6.
King d4.
Oh, that knight deserves a medal for what it's doing right now.
Knight f6 looks great. King d4 can also be played. And
Division of labor.
Yeah, now knight d6, c4 drops, and the white king is way too slow going after the h-pawn.
I don't know, but Hikaru's kings can kind of look like Ferraris, and...
The king is going after the h-pawn. Look at 12 seconds for black.
Knights suck.
Oh my goodness. And he takes it. Is he going to win? He's going to win.
He's going to promote with check.
Hikaru is going to win this game.
Don't go king g7, because that lets the knight access f5. Is
Wow.
the winning move king g6, Robert? Is it king g5?
Let's see. He's calculating. You see, look at him on screen. He is
Both
hovering.
moves win.
Both moves are winning. He plays king g6. And
No.
this is unbelievable.
No, but to go for the A pawn when it was clear that the H pawn was falling, that is just a mindless decision by Hans. He's going to lose this game, but you still have to convert this. Knight and pawn versus queen can be tricky, Robert.
But in a,
A2, he's allowed. No, A2, queen G8.
okay, so where's king b3? So the king is actually
Oh
going
my
to
gosh.
hide in enemy territory. And how do you win this now?
Well, Hikaru had a chance to put the queen on A2, and that would have completely paralyzed any further chances the black had. Now he can't get the queen A2 anymore.
So he's going to keep giving a bunch of checks. We're going to have to keep an eye on the 50-move rule if no pawns or captures are made. But the A2 threat forced him to keep giving these checks.
Hans does not deserve to lose this game, so I think he's earned a draw here. But people assume that as long as the pawn isn't on A2, it's winning. Not so fast.
Oh,
He's allowed queen A2
A2.
again! And he missed it again.
But he's still winning because his king is so close.
Oh my gosh, but how do you win this?
Queen A4,
Zig and Zag,
king D3.
finally.
Oh my goodness, and Hans is just so upset with himself right here. Hikaru Nakamura steals a game from the jaws of defeat, and now the lead is at 4 points for the first time. Danya, can you believe what we just saw?
Listen, that previous draw, Hikaru drew that. That bunker-style game, remember that Hikaru turned around? He won that game. This one, Hans lost.
And he lost it multiple times, right? Even at the end, he still had a chance, but that was a miss. And if you're enjoying the stream, please subscribe. This isn't the 21st of September, but it is the 7th of September on Twitch. Get 30% off your sub for a limited time only. Your subscription makes events like this possible, plus unlocks exclusive new emotes for every event and access to exclusive break time content during the show. Use the command subscribe in chat now to level Can't believe it. Hikaru Nakamura is a magician. We'll be right back in the Speed Chess Championship consolation match in a bit.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. We're in Paris for the 2024 Speed Chess Championship at the E spot. I wonder if anyone here plays chess. Let's go find out.
You play chess?
20 years ago,
Yeah?
I finished conservatory in Kiev.
You can't name one chess player?
No,
Like-
it was some improvisation, something like this. I was only classic player.
But, like, what about a world champion? Can you name one world champion?
One
Yeah.
BB King.
A board game, a game, chess.
Rhythmic gymnastic, but I don't champion. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
You understand?
No? Thank you for answering my question. Okay, we're going. Do you play chess? Yes? No? Why not?
And it was really, really boring.
I don't speak.
Yeah, I don't speak French either, and I came prepared to say I don't speak French in French. But
tu veux, tu peux me parler en anglais, moi je te parle en français.
when I say chess, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Concentration.
Concentration.
Yeah, logic.
Great word. Logic.
Yeah,
Okay.
because he used to teach me, but
Okay.
I'm not really into it. There's a picture of us as kids playing, and
Yeah.
my face shows how I'm not into it.
Why you don't play chess? I'd love to hear it.
Because I'm really active. I like sports.
My kids play outside. Too, so they don't play chess either. You play chess?
Yes,
Yeah. Where do you play chess?
just at home with my friends.
Do you know any chess players?
Yeah, Bobby Fischer.
Capablanca? Do you know who Magnus Carlsen is?
Absolutely. The goat. Jan Gustafsson.
Jan Gustafsson. There you go.
I mean, we are German.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to Jan.
Harry Stolbore.
Who?
Harry Stolbore.
If you just named someone I don't know, that is fascinating. Are we not allowed to film here? Not even here?
I can do streamers.
Okay, so give me 5 chess streamers for €5.
Andrea, Alexandro Botes,
That's 2. We got 2.
Eric Hansen.
All Canada so far. Team Canada. Eric Rosen. Okay.
One more, right?
Yeah, one
Anna
more.
Crumling.
Wow.
Higher. Oh, you might just not have long enough arms.
No, don't tell me that. Don't T-Rex little arm me. Magnus is here for the Speed Chess Championship. You know what that is?
it at eSpot.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Are you excited for the rematch of Magnus Carlsen versus Hans Niemann?
Oh, Hans Niemann?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, of course.
It's a big it's
Okay, then
it's
I'm
sold,
gonna watch
sold
live.
out. It's sold out, yeah. It's a
crazy,
big deal.
okay.
If they're actually playing.
They are playing on Friday.
They haven't played yet.
They haven't played yet since the
You don't
scandal.
know what Magnus does after move 1, Norse.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Yes.
Go and push chess.com and chess world in general, because it's a pretty good game. You learn so much from chess over the world and how it works and everything. So I think it's a good thing for you, from you.
Perfect. You got it.
Thank you. Thank you. Merci. We're out of here. The guy's still following me. You don't have jurisdiction over here. Okay, he still wants us out of here. Everyone's so friendly. So I don't think our visit would have been complete without a stop at the Eiffel Tower. But that monument is a little too far for them to kick me out of. So with that, I will say goodnight, everyone, and we'll see you around on chess.com.
We're getting word that 5-time Speed Chess champion Hikaru Nakamura is doing Puzzle Rush during the break. His jacket is off. The gloves have already been off, maybe for a couple of years, some might say. But Danya, Hikaru has to 4 points. Hans Niemann, he's struggling. He, of course, has played some great chess. But to lose that game, is that the heartbreaker?
I mean, there have been several heartbreakers, and Hans has done a lot of things right. He's had a couple memorable moments. That queen sack, He brought the lead down to 1, but you called it during the break. Consistency is the order of the day when you try to beat someone like Hikaru, and that is just what has been lacking for Hans. Too many missed opportunities, too many blunders, and right now he's got a Herculean task ahead of him because this lead is ballooned to 4 at the worst possible moment.
And that was a very weird game because Hikaru had an extra pawn and then he just gave it away. And then suddenly he was much worse than an end game. And then when Hans was completely winning, he rushed a pawn down the board. There's a bishop sacrifice. He allowed his opponent to queen, and then he did have one chance there, but couldn't hold on. So I think the key, Danya, has been Hikaru's time management in this time control.
And you're right on every count. When you talk about how seldom Hikaru blunders like that, how seldom he gives you a gift, you have to accept that gift and at least get half a point from that game. But Hans has to clean up his play. He has to play faster and more confidently. Where does he find that mojo? Well, we're about to find out. We have another anti-Berlin. This is how the 3+1 segment started. And Hans with the bishop g5 variation. This is very typical, Robert. The bishop coming back to e7 and then d6.
That way you don't face any pins on that diagonal there. It's a bit passive. The bishop on e7 is restricted by its own pieces, but at the same time, white doesn't have any direct threats. So Hikaru is the first thing, in knight g4. I don't think I've seen this idea, but he's clearly playing for f5.
He's shown every kind of way to prepare f5. That knight can drop back to h6. I remember Alexander Morozevich, legendary player. He showed some ideas like this with colors reversed. No, the knight comes back to f6, but nothing about Hikaru's play has been predictable.
He brought his knight back
E6.
to b8. Yeah, he went knight back to b8, pawn to b6, and that's the thing about this structure. White is better because you're bringing your knight forward. All the moves have been natural, but how do you actually crack black's position?
Well, queen d2 is my kind of instinct in these types of positions. Get the queen to h6, maybe even now. At least that should be calculated because AB, knight g5, Hans wants none of it. He wants to keep this bishop and pin the f-pawn. I'm all for creativity, but this just might be bad rather than creative.
Yeah, the knight is back on b8, right? It was already developed, it went back, and now you're undeveloping and setting up for the next game. So b5 hits that bishop. Bishop b3 is very tempting to keep staring at the black king side, but perhaps it's better to bring that bishop with bishop d5. I wouldn't go there, but it does make a lot of sense opening up the e-file. And you're trying to get rid of that knight on f6. So Danya, bishop d5 had some serious merit.
That bishop was like standing on the Arizona, New Mexico, Utah borders. Like, where do I go? Do I go anywhere? Because queen h6, I'm a broken record, but this is oftentimes the beginning of the end. And the issue is if black moves the rook from f8 to try to make space for the queen, then knight g5 also hits the f7 pawn. Queen h6, king h8, and knight g8 also might not be in time. Hans plays it.
Is there c5 here as a way to save yourself? He's just trying to shut down the diagonal. c4 coming next. The bishop will have to retreat, and then these ideas of rook e. Donna, it's the same idea that we both want, but Hikaru first is making sure the f7 pawn doesn't fall victim to a direct attack.
Such a cold-blooded reaction. Hikaru entrusts the entire defensive task to this knight on f6, but it's not just that one knight, it's the knight on d7 that supports it, eliminating the possibility of these deflection ideas, which just aren't as effective. Actually, the g-pawn doing such a great job too. So it's a full team effort in terms of black keeping white's kingside at bay. And again, Hans is invested. Over a minute now. The deficit that he faces, where's the mate? Maybe he needs to go rook e3, but queen f8 is coming and the time is ticking in both senses.
You've asked me this several times today. Would you trade a slightly better position for some time? Here, I would definitely, once again, take black. It's not a clear position. Black is up a minute and a half in a 3-minute game, Danya. So Hikaru just keeps doing this. He is playing this sort of style where it's not clear how to actually create a new target, how to get at him, and he just wants the lead on the clock.
He's played provocative chess, and he's done it deliberately. I think he's sniffed out the right strategy. He senses that Hans isn't really confident in his ability to finish these games. He's taking too much time in certain moments, and now black doesn't even feel worse. Maybe Hans should open a second front with a4, go for that a-file, and he does. That's some good decision-making. Are we going to see complete chaos?
Wow, that would be a move. I just have to give a shout out to Hans real quick, because queen d2 back, when you have more space, you typically want to keep more pieces on the board, so he didn't trade those queens. An h6 play to get the black king out, but Donna, the a-file is open. Hikaru seems to be in serious danger, and yet he's so far ahead on the clock that I don't feel like he's that nervous.
Hikaru is a glutton for punishment. He's taking all of the punishment in the world on both sides of the board, and that chaos button, it's blinking red. d5 seems pretty tempting. That's what Hikaru did the last time Hans put a knight on h4.
Well, then Knight wants to go to f5, sacrifice a piece to go right after the Black King, and Hans is down under a minute. So Hikaru's investing his time right now. You see him on screen there. He's really calculating, and d5 is tempting, but it does open up that bishop on c2, so that would at least cause me pause.
And maybe the rook on a7 has to be eliminated, but to do that, you need to move this bishop maybe up to c6. Obviously, you want white to go d5. If the center is closed, at least you don't have to worry about d takes e5 happening at the wrong moment, because if the knight moves from f6, the queen is X-raying the other knight. So there's a lot to keep track of, a lot of moving parts. And indeed, Hikaru beefs up his sort of central security.
Oh.
Hans voluntarily goes d5.
No.
You're shocked by this too, right?
Well, you were playing bishop c6 to invite d5, so now it doesn't even gain a tempo. And as you're pointing out, knight can come to c5, and with the center avenues for attack, and rook e8, I don't think I fully understand. Is he waiting for f4?
Well, it's a demonstrative move. I think he says, well, my job here on d8 is done. Thank you for closing the center. Typical Hikaru move, knight h7. And see, now you don't have d takes e5, which would have eliminated this move. Hans is losing the thread of the game here, but he's still doing fine.
And he's playing much more quickly than he was earlier. So he's down 20 seconds still. The knight can go to c5 for black, but you always watch out for knight f5. That at some point could be very dangerous. The Black King doesn't have that many defenders. In f2 to f4, you knew where I was going. That will open up an avenue on the f line for that rook sitting on f1.
Yeah, no, kudos to Hans. I mean, every time it seems like he's been losing momentum in this game, he's kind of gained it back. And Hikaru, he understands that this is still very dangerous. f4, the side that controls the pawn breaks, controls the position. Said Socrates in 600 BC. And Hans using both of his major advantages, right? On the king side, he's got knight f5. And on the queen side, he's got the a file under control. He's squeezing all the juice from those two assets.
And the bishop on c8, it allows the rook on b8 to protect b5. It also takes away the f5 square from any of these knight jumps. So suddenly black is turning this around. Hikaru, he's about even on the clock. In fact, he's the one who's down a second. Now it's back to level. But Dunya, it does feel like black's gained the momentum here because white has these double rooks in the 7th rank that aren't gaining any ground.
Back to level. His play has been on another level. This is more bunker chess from Hikaru and another time scramble impending. We know how those have gone. Not very well for Hans.
And he goes rook c8, getting rid of one of those rooks on the 7th. And now everything is defended for black down. The king can go to g7 at any moment to make sure there's no funny business on the king side. And here he's going to focus on the queen side.
Hikaru has just operated on the bottom 3 ranks for this entire game, and somehow he is making the most of it. Queen d8, queen b6 is going to eliminate the vestiges of white's initiative.
Whoa.
Or are they?
Knight takes e5, a shot out of nowhere.
So.
Okay, then rook on b8's under attack, so you take on a7, b8 drops. You take back on d7 with the knight. You could get a situation down there where the knights outclass the bishop, but wow, trading queens in the process.
f4 and e5, bishop a4. Suddenly Hans back to attacking here, but he's got 5 seconds.
And look at this game. The b file's open, rook b2, knight c5, but e5 is available.
Oh, 96, but he drops the bishop on c2, but then white will play rook f7 at the end. Oh.
King g8, what a cold-blooded move.
Zig and Zaga, the bishop on c2 might be trapped. It's been captured. Chaos on the board.
The d-pawn runs. He gives up the f4 pawn to go d7, rook d2, f takes e5, and then the d-pawn goes anyway.
Hans doesn't want to play d7 because Hikaru will get a million pawns for the knight. A discovery with knight e6. He wants to time d7, right? Maybe knight f4, knight d5 can be considered.
But knight f4 would have been by rook d2, so you didn't want to allow that rook to get behind the pawn. And now suddenly there's some danger for white if you're not careful because c2 is a threat.
It's a huge threat. And even if king e2, still c2, he plays it now.
And he goes rook. So black is up a pawn. So this is terrible news for not for Hikaru, for Hans, because Hikaru's up a pawn, can play the.
What just happened? I'm going to pretend the last 15 moves don't exist. Hikaru doesn't only play this forever, he's good at winning these positions, right? Putting the rook on the right square to prevent a pre-move. He knows all these tricks. Trust me, I know. Rook e3, rook g3.
Oh.
h4 is going to draw.
Yeah, this is going to be a nice find from Hans Niemann. He is going to be able to save this game. But look at Hikaru. He's just spending king g7.
Okay, rook g5 was a forced draw. Hans could have played g3 at the end.
He wants more time gone from this match clock.
And he's also playing for the win because Hans could lose the g-pawn. He shouldn't. He should draw this, but it'll take some more time, as you said.
g4 wants rook a7. Creative ways. 1 second for Hans. Now Hikaru's up a pawn once more and can play this game out.
I think Hikaru is going to win this. I think Hans might lose his patience. He might say, I'm tired of defending this. And now it's actually a hard draw. He has to do the alternate Philidor. No, he can take in king g2. He missed it all.
Oh Oh my
G2
gosh.
the draw there, Robert.
And he slaps himself in the face. He cannot believe what's happened here. Hikaru Nakamura once again steals a victory.
King F1 at the end. Unacceptable by Hans. He did everything to draw it, and he is sabotaging himself. But only Hikaru seems to win games like that.
And we heard the oohing and the eyeing from the fans here. They cannot believe it either. The evaluation bar was steady for such a long time, and then suddenly it plummets in Hikaru's favor. Donna, it's a 5-point lead now for Hikaru. It might be getting out of hand for Hans.
Hans's self-belief, his confidence, his mojo, it has propelled him the last couple months. It seems like he's lost his belief in his ability to come back and win this match. You can just feel it in the air, and it's a lot of heat in the air. And it's coming from Hikaru, perhaps.
Yeah, it must be exhausting playing all these games. So we are going to take a second. We're going to throw this over to James Canty and some VIP guests. There might be a chess queen in the house. So James, how you doing out there?
We're doing great down here. We're in the Diamond Lounge of. Look, we have a chess queen, Grandmaster Alexandra Kosteniuk, two-time women's world champion. How are you?
Fine, great. Watching chess.
How are you liking Paris? What's the vibe like?
I love Paris. It was a nice excuse, actually, the Speed Chess Championship to come to pass by Paris, because I was planning to go to Budapest directly to play in the Chess Olympiad. And then, well, somebody offered me to come to Paris. I couldn't say no. So, yeah, enjoying Paris. And actually, we filmed today about the famous French player, composer, Philidor. And we just saw this Philidor position. So, you know, Paris and chess is everywhere. And I'm very happy and excited to see chess in the center of Paris.
Speaking of chess, what do you think about the position on the board right now? What's actually going on? What can you tell us?
Well, I think actually it's going to be very difficult for Hans to recover from this rook blunder in the famous drawish Philidor position that was supposed to be a draw. And, well, we see a very big score difference, like +5. Hikaru is leading, so it's going to be tough, and he might lose this one as well, because, well, when you blunder in blitz, you don't have time, you know, to recover, to calm down, to relax, and to take it over again. I mean, you have to, like, the show must go on, and unfortunately, chess can be very cruel.
What do you think about a women's SCC live? How do you feel about that?
Actually, I'm looking forward to seeing it happening maybe in Paris next year, going from online to live. You see, the public supports me, yeah!
No promises, Danny. Okay, you heard that, Daniel Wrench. You heard that, right? Okay, cool. Back to you guys up in the studio.
So cool to hear the thoughts of Alexandra Kosteniuk, a legend of the game of chess, and James Canty. I mean, always fun to see him. They're having a good time with the crowd in the VIP area. But look, we see what's going on in this game. Hikaru Nakamura with the white pieces, Danya. He once again has an advantage. I shouldn't even say once again, because the games he's winning, it seems like he's winning them from a disadvantage. Could this be bad that he's ahead in this game?
I mean, I don't think there's anything bad about this 3-minute segment, other than, you know, Hans's play. And everyone's eyes remain transfixed on the board. Big shout out there to Alexandra Kosteniuk, and a good luck to her at the Olympiad, where she will be representing Switzerland. Okay, there's the answer. Queen F4. I think Hikaru deliberately trying to make his position worse so that he can put that psychological pressure on Hans. But there's no other way to put it. Hans is getting smoked, or shall I say he's getting moked.
Oh, no.
Holy mokes. Queen F6 is coming, and do we care about this rook on D1?
No, because there's also, not only is F7 hanging, bishop H6 in many positions. So queen takes F6 is a knockout. Look at Hikaru. He used to have a show called Nakamura's Knockouts, and this is one of them.
And you want to hear the worst part is bishop H6. It would be winning normally, but it also comes with a discovered attack against the queen to make matters even worse. And matters could not possibly be worse for Hans's comeback chances, because this lead has spiraled into a complete tailspin. It'll be at 6, and Hikaru versus Ali Reza. This is giving off those kinds of vibes, but Hikaru has a proven track record of comebacks. He wasn't able to make one. It's not looking like Hans is anywhere near a comeback right now.
No, 10.5 to 4.5. We hear a round of applause from the audience, and look at that close-up on Hikaru. It's like he's streaming right now.
He's streaming, he's singing, he's playing, he's bopping, he's vibing. What isn't he doing right now?
Well, I wonder what he's listening to, because I think
He's
Magnus
losing.
was listening to Flo Rida, so I don't know what on Hikaru's playlist, but if the production team can let us know, that'd be cool. But right now, Hikaru, you see him look up. He's trying to figure out this position. Danya, I will say that it looks pretty decent for Hans from the start, but it's not really about how the games have begun. It's how Hans has been able to hold himself together in some of the complications. And in the 3-minute portion, you look at the score at 5.5 in Hikaru's favor.
And the opening is oftentimes the most important phase of the game in classical chess. There's been such an accent on it, but not every SCC match, and in fact, very few blitz matches are decided by the biggest factor. It hasn't been a factor at all here. It almost doesn't matter what variation of the Rui Lopez they play, whether Hikaru goes knight f3 or e4. It's the middle games, it's the time scrambles, it's the other factors that have been decisive. And that last game, the chess gods punishing Hans because to lose a Philidor position in Paris, there's a route of Philidor Street, not more than 3 miles from here. This is looking grim. Maybe for black in this game, Hikaru is maybe taking too many liberties here.
I'm not sure I've actually ever seen a pawn structure like this with those double B pawns and a pawn A5, double E
I don't
pawns.
want to see one ever again.
Yeah, no, this is one of these pawn structures that only a mother could love, and it's just really not looking pleasant for black. A knight hops into F4, and I mean, suddenly Hikaru has play. Like, this is, I don't know how he does it, but it's like, you look at it, you're like, strategically he's in trouble, and then you're like, how does white make his next move? And Danya, the one thing that I would say